In the heart of bustling Nairobi, George Karanja was a man who could buy anything except the sound of his daughter's voice. A self-made tycoon whose name built highways, estates, and towering malls, George was powerless in his own mansion, where his only child, Amani, hadn't spoken a word in almost a year. Since her mother's sudden passing, Amani's laughter had vanished, replaced by a quiet emptiness that even the country's best doctors and therapists couldn't touch. They came with flashcards, puppets, games, but Amani just sat by the window, lips shut tight, lost in her own world. George's empire felt worthless without her voice echoing through the hallways. Desperate, he did what people called foolish. He offered 10 million shillings, a fortune, to anyone who could make his daughter speak again. The story spread through Nairobi's streets like wildfire, carried by boda riders and whispered through market stalls. Specialists flew in from South Africa, Europe, India, even America, each armed with new promises and fancy tools. None could unlock the door to Amani's silence. And in the middle of this circus, unnoticed, was Malaika, a young woman from Kisumu who washed dishes every night at one of George Karanja's luxury hotels downtown. Malaika had grown up on the shores of Lake Victoria, orphaned too soon, raising her brothers with nothing but her mother's recipes and her own courage. To her, food was more than survival. It was a language when words failed. She spoke Kiswahili, Luo, a touch of English, and snatches of Arabic she picked up selling fish to Somali traders. One night, cleaning plates at the hotel after a grand banquet, Malaika overheard the waiters joking about the mute heiress. Something in her heart twisted. Memories of her mother coaxing laughter from a room with nothing but fish stew bubbling on a charcoal stove. That night, with her last coins, Malaika boarded a matatu Turunda and walked up the winding driveway to George Karanja's guarded mansion. The gatekeepers laughed at her torn sweater, asked her if she'd lost her way. But when George stepped outside, exhausted from a day of failed meetings with experts, he saw something in Malaika's steady eyes. She told him she wanted no reward, just one chance to try. The next dawn, Malaika stepped into the grand white kitchen, bigger than any home she'd known. She carried a simple basket, fresh tilapia, sweet potatoes, green bananas, a small bag of maize flour, her mother's battered wooden spoon wrapped in cloth. The house staff scoffed as the scent of lake fish replaced the imported spices they were used to. Amani sat curled by the window, ignoring her untouched plate of fancy breakfast. Then, drifting through the marble hallways, came something warm and earthy, the smell of fish frying gently with onions, sweet potatoes bubbling in a pot. Malaika didn't call out. She simply hummed an old Luo tune, her mother's song, mixing it with soft Kiswahili words as she stirred her pot. Slowly, Amani turned her head. She stood up, tiny feet padding across the cold tiles, drawn by something she didn't know she'd missed. Malaika greeted her like an old friend and offered her a small chip bowl, steam curling up like an invitation. Amani sniffed, dipped her fingers, tasted, and for the first time in almost a year, her lips parted. She whispered, so soft that only Malaika could hear, "Samaki." Fish. One word. One tiny word that cracked open George Karanja's grief. He dropped to his knees in the kitchen doorway, tears welling as he heard Amani repeat it again. Samaki. Fish. Samaki. From that morning, Amani waited for Malaika every day at dawn. Together they sat on the floor of the sparkling kitchen, peeling bananas, mashing sweet potatoes, stirring fish stew. Each meal came with a new word, omina, sukumawiki, kachambari, and bit by bit, Amani's silence melted away like sugar in tea. Soon, Malaika started weaving in greetings from all over. Salam in Arabic, habari in Kiswahili, jambo in Swahili, karibu in Somali. Amani giggled as she repeated each one, tasting them like spices in a stew. George watched his once quiet home bloom with laughter and the sound of languages mixing like herbs in Malaika's pot. The same staff who mocked her now lined up for a taste of her humble meals. George, once hardened by contracts and concrete, found himself sitting cross-legged on the floor, eating tilapia and soft ugali with his daughter and the girl who brought her voice back. Gossip spread that George Karanja, the sharp tycoon, spent afternoons peeling cassava with a kitchen girl. But he didn't care. He offered Malaika cars, a big salary, even her own house, but all she asked for was a small plot to open her own cafe, where anyone could come, rich or poor, to taste home. George made it happen. Malaika's simple roadside cafe became a symbol, a place where truck drivers, CEOs, street kids, and tourists sat together, dipping chapati in stew, learning each other's words. Years later, Amani, who once sat in silence, stood at a food festival in Mombasa launching her first cookbook, Flavors That Speak. She greeted the crowd in English, Kiswahili, Luo, Somali, and Arabic, telling them that food is the first language we all share, and that one humble meal can break any silence, one word at a time.